representatives, stakeholders, and colleagues. Welcome to the permanent mission of Italy to the United Nations, and thank you for having joined this afternoon at this high-level roundtable on strengthening small and middle enterprises for a climate-resilient tomorrow. Allow me to thank the Generali Insurance Group and UNDP in particular for having accepted to partner with the Permanent Mission of Italy to convene this meeting jointly at the margins of the UN General High-Level Week and also in the context of the ongoing New York Climate Week. Italy is very proud to highlight the role and impact of sustainability champions, both from the private and public sector, and to foster partnerships for advancing the SDGs in all regions. This is the case, for instance, of the ongoing and growing partnership between General Group and UNDP through its insurance and risk finance facility that we have been accompanying over the years and on which we will hear more today, together with other impactful initiatives. As you know, just a few days ago, member states adopted an ambitious pact for the future, where the acceleration of SDGs was once again emphasized. SDG acceleration can only be achieved with all hands on deck. Public and private leadership and financing are key, blending and scaling up what works for the people, the planet, and for inclusive prosperity and sustainable development. Small and middle enterprises play a crucial role in this endeavor across all the regions of the world, since they are the backbone of any economy and society. From a small island state to bigger countries, from the Pacific to the Atlantic, from Europe to Africa and Asia. Our own story of economic development in Italy was marked by the sustainable growth of our own small and medium enterprises, and it is a model that we have been consistently supporting also in our development cooperation action. These challenges, among multidimensional shocks, including climate change, the interconnectivity and key demographic as well as value chain related factors, have diversified the environment for SMEs. They're called to adapt quicker to new challenges and opportunities. We're indeed proud to continue investing and promoting actions to support SMEs, especially in Africa and beyond, also through our development cooperation system, as we will hear later today. And I'm delighted about our conversation that we are having today. And to begin with, I'm very pleased to introduce the first part of this roundtable. To begin with, I have next to me the Chief Sustainability Officer of General Group, Ms. Lucia Silva, and UNDP Assistant Administrator of UNDP, Marcos Neto. And first, I'm pleased to give the floor to Ms. Silva for her remarks and for presenting more about the Generali's action in support of a climate-resilient SMEs around on our ongoing partnerships. Yeah, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, and I join you in welcoming everyone and thanking you for being here. I think it's super important, really important. And I think that when it comes with SMEs, of course, for Generali, SMEs are a focus because of our business. We are a retail company. And because of resilience is a key concept when it comes with extreme event that hit our client and the asset that we insure. So we are committed in managing both the part of mitigation of climate change throughout our investments and underwriting activities. But also we are focusing on the adaptation piece, so the physical risk that hits people and clients. And when it comes to the SME, we have created an initiative, it's called SME Enterprise at the 4th edition. The primary focus was SMEs in Europe. Why? Because this is our main market, so our footprint is more effective in really kind of driving the change. But on the other hand, so we are also thinking about the Green Deal and the transformation that Europe is trying to push ahead. And we think that in the Green Deal, SMEs were not really part of the big discussion. So the Green Deal about the big corporation changing their own way of working. So the idea is that as SMEs are the backbone of the economy, of all the economy actually, but especially in Europe, if you transform SMEs in a more and the business model in a more sustainable way, you transform. And if you ensure that SMEs are more resilient, you ensure that all the society is more resilient, like jobs for millions of people. So the idea was then creating more partnership, because our SME enterprise was really about gathering European Commission representatives and other stakeholders around the table to talk about how SMEs can be impacted by climate change and how it's important they transform their business models. And we thought that, well, we found with UNDP a fantastic partner really to think ahead and think bigger. That's why we started thinking and focusing on Malaysia. And there we have been working. We published a report on SME resilience. We have a website to help SMEs to be more aware of the risk they have on flooding. And also we had an innovation about the insurance product that can help SMEs to drive the change. So I really hope that this meeting will help everyone really to focus a little bit more on SMEs. Thinking about that, what I said before already, that SMEs are really the backbone of the economy. If we work with SMEs, we work with the overall society, and we help the overall society to be more resilient. Like the mission of everyone. Thank you very much.
Very much, Lucia, for your interesting remarks. I forgot, I would like to acknowledge here with us the presence of the Foreign Minister. Now I give the floor to...
Grazie, Ambassador. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks, Lucia, for the partnership, and as we're going to hear more. It's a great pleasure to welcome here for this event. From the climate crisis and environmental degradation to socioeconomic instability and escalating conflict, we need only to watch the news to know we are living in a world of rising risks. We at UNDP have been measuring human development progress for the last 30 years, which, until recently, has always been on the rise. Then in 2021, as a result of the pandemic, which shuttered business, crippled health systems, and disrupted schools around the world, we saw human development progress decline for the first time in 30 years. And this trend continued 2 years in a row. In fact, in response to the aftermath of COVID-19, 90% of countries report a decline in human development, and over 100 million people were pushed back into poverty. This has shown us that progress on the SDGs is not static, and that we must protect the financial resilience of everyone in the face of rising risks, especially small business, which make up to 90% of business population globally. In OECD countries, SMEs contribute more than 50% to national GDP, while in the developing world, just formal SMEs contribute up to 40% of national GDP. Smallholder farmers of 2 to 5 hectares, which themselves are small business, produce 46% of the world's food on around 1/3 of the world's agricultural land. These businesses are the backbone of the global economy. But SMEs in developing countries are especially vulnerable to the impacts of hazards and shocks because they are highly dependent on commodities of which availability and prices are increasingly volatile, and lack of social safety nets and financial protection. It is estimated that only 1% of smallholder farmers in sub-Saharan Africa, a sector that produces at least 23% of the area's GDP, are covered by insurance, making them extremely vulnerable to an increased number of disasters. Similarly, only 5% of SMEs in Southeast Asia have financial protection of any kind. The growth and survival of Southeast Asian MSMEs are threatened by a wide range of long-standing challenges, including limited access to financing, limited human resources, limited use of technology, but also rapidly rising risks, in particular, our changing climate and health crisis, such as the recent pandemic. Without financial resilience, development is not sustainable. And as the world and its supply chains are increasingly interconnected, it is important that we recognize that we are only as strong as our weakest link, and that the impacts of crisis on people and business across the world can ripple into our daily lives. In 2023, nearly 60% of global insurance crop production was unprotected against natural disasters and accidents, posing a significant threat towards food security. As a result of war in Europe, grain prices rose 23%. Data shows that for every 1% increase in food prices, an additional 1 million people are pushed into poverty. Price of coffee beans has risen between 64% and 187% since June 2020. Market observers say the inflationary trend is likely to continue thanks to severe drought conditions caused by climate change in Vietnam and Brazil, two countries known for exporting coffee. At the UN, we recognize that tackling rising and interconnected risks will require partnerships that leverage the complementarity strength of the public and private sector, which is why we are proud to partner with Generali. Together with Generali, we are looking at how we can build the resilience of small business in developing countries, as well as the global supply chains on which we are all reliant to climate change and other risks. We are doing this by creating frameworks for SMEs to manage the flood risks, developing research on the role of insurance in support SMEs' resilience across the value chain, and support innovative new insurance models that targets SME through our joint insurance innovation challenge. Increasingly, with Generali, we are looking forward to not just SMEs themselves, but also at the financial resilience of the whole value chain in which SMEs produce, grow, and thrive. But we know that there is more that we can accomplish together, which is why we are already in discussions with the Italian government, CDP, and Generali to see what we can enhance in our collaboration to build the resilience of small business and strengthen global value chains. And we invite all of you here with us today to join us on this journey to protect the future and create a more sustainable and resilient world. Thank you very much.
Marcos, now I will pass the floor to Jean Cadet, head of the Insurance Risk Finance Facility at UNDP, who will moderate a panel discussion among key stakeholders before then opening the floor for additional intervention. And the floor is yours.
Thank you, Excellency. Pleasure to be here and to be here with all the colleagues. So I have three excellent panelists with me today, talking about the role of financial resilience within particularly small business and value chains, and how critical it is, and perhaps also how missing it is when it comes to the world of development and development assistance. As Marcus just indicated, critical in terms of how they are to economies and to communities and countries, but significantly at risk of many shocks and hazards. And perhaps the way in which the international system finances the financial resilience of small business is an area which is to be examined, and perhaps our panelists could also consider that as we ask a few questions. So my first speaker is Minister Carlo Battori, head of the Financing for Development, Digital and Environment Affairs at the DG for Development Cooperation, Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Italian International Cooperation. And then I will have Mr. Paolo Lombardo, Director of International Development Cooperation at Casa Depositi e Prestiti. And finally, Annie Borello Fiorilla di Santa Croce, UN Permanent Representative of the World Union of Small and Medium Enterprises, as well as a partner of Foxhoran and Camerini. Thank you very much for all of you to be here today. So first, Minister Battori, Italian government is investing heavily in various areas of development assistance, right? In the moment, G7 presidency, Mattei plan, etc. So I wonder how you see that work, particularly looking towards supporting SMEs, supporting value chains in developing countries, particularly in terms of being more resilient to climate change.
Thank you, Gian, Ambassador Massari, Excellencies, thanks for having me. I think it's particularly important, and I'm very much attached to this issue in touching upon 1 year ago in the margins of the COP29, if I recall correctly, It is, in fact, one of the most pressing issues of societies to the climate change. But as it was eloquently said earlier on by Ms. Silva, SMEs are the backbone of societies in a way, and if the SMEs are not resilient, societies as a whole can be less resilient on the verge of implosion. The Italian development cooperation has a long history of interventions in support of SMEs. Having a phone call to my colleagues of AIX, I asked her to give me an example, a few examples, and she started to give me a long, endless list of interventions of the Italian development cooperations. I just want to pick up a couple that have been particularly successful. One in Tunisia that have been, by the way, renewed for 9 times. It's a credit line very successful with the involvement of the local banking sector, particularly to support agricultural SMEs that are, of course, much impacted by climate change, particularly in a country like Tunisia. And this has been assessed as very positively also by an internal audit, an external audit that we made in terms of impact. Another one that is, I think, worth mentioning is the program PASPED in Senegal, with the involvement, by the way, of our DFI, Cassa Depositi e Prestiti, and in close cooperation with the European part of the project together with the EU funds, and involved also the diasporas. That one is also another important piece of our strategy to support the resilience of SMEs. There are, of course, other countries where we intervene. Perhaps some are working well, some are working less well, depending on the number of circumstances. But I want to use, my last 2 minutes to make a specific reference to one value chain that is particularly important for the Italian development cooperations, and I would say for the Italian foreign policy as a whole, because Italy decided to put this value chain at the core of the agenda of the G7. I'm talking about coffee. Coffee is one of the most traded commodity in the world. It is source of value cash crop. I think Marcus alluded to it briefly to specify how deeply production of coffee is influenced by climate change. We were last week in London in the International Coffee Association Council meeting, and they were saying it is just a matter of, a couple of hurricanes in Brazil, and then the price of coffee can be skyrocketing or dropping down and putting in poverty quite a lot of millions of farmers that mostly live under poverty line. So we wanted to work on coffee. We wanted to have coffee on top of the agenda of the G7, highlighting the importance of this commodity and this cash crop, particularly for countries that, like the African countries that are producing coffee, and millions of families depend on this product. Normally with, land that is not, bigger than 1 hectare. Recent studies demonstrated that if we don't make meaningful changes in the way we produce coffee, in the next 20 years, there won't be any longer 25 or 30 producing countries of coffee like we have now, but there will only be 2 producing countries, probably Brazil and Vietnam. And I would say this would create enormous problems, especially for African coffee producing countries. So the Italian government, bearing in mind that, of course, the importance of coffee value chain for a number of reasons, including for the coffee industry that relies on the diversification and the enhancement of quality stemming from different varieties of coffees produced around the world, We have decided to, also in the framework of the Mattei Plan, to originate an ambitious project to support the resilience of the coffee value chains. We are starting with 5 priority countries, but we are in principle expanding this potentially to all the 25 producing countries in Africa to support not only the value addition, but the resilience of the value chains in impact or against the impact or addressing the challenge of the climate change impact. This is extremely important because this project will be modular. This project will be open to co-financing. We are in touch with the important financial institutions such as the World Bank, but also in touch with European Union partners in order to make sure that this becomes also a flagship of the global gateway, just to mean how important this, the protection and the support and the resilience of this value chain is for the future of economic future of many African countries. And SMEs, particularly small farmers, are really at the core of this strategy because the program will benefit, of course, I'm not going to go into details, but will benefit directly, precisely these small producing companies and households that are extremely important and are really the basis of the production of coffee, particularly in Africa. I just allude very quickly and I conclude. As part of this strategy, the G7 is also discussing the possibility to establish a global private public fund to support the resilience of the coffee value chain. The discussion is ongoing, of course, in the run-up to the ministerial meeting of Pescara, G7 ministerial of Pescara, where hopefully this proposal will be further articulated and launched. Just the title, I don't want to go into details. Insurance against or to address the issue of the impact of climate change can be considered as a component of this global fund. Of course, very much will depend on the technical feasibility, availability of funds, support by donors. There are a lot of caveats, but we clearly identified this specific component as an important component of a possible fund to support the resilience of the coffee value chain, of course, in this case, not only for Africa, but at global level, considering the nature of this fund. I'll stop here and I'm ready to take questions, of course, if any. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vittori, for those words. Just thinking before I hand over to Paolo in terms of Africa, where, of course, the strategy is focused. Our colleagues at the WMO predict that 4 out of every 5 African countries by 2030 will not have their own sustainable water supply. And the impact of that on SMEs and indeed value chains, such as coffee, is going to be absolutely immense. So the role of financial resilience as well as other kinds of investment is certainly a very important thing for us to consider. And if I may also ask Paolo for you to consider that and alongside this question, if you like. So small and medium enterprises representing the backbone of many economies, as our speakers have said so far in many parts of the world. I wonder if you can reflect on how development banks can play a pivotal role in strengthening their resilience to climate change and economic shocks. And what is Casa Depositi e Prestiti? What is your perspective on this and perhaps your actions into the future? Thank you, sir.
Just said how important SMEs are, but I think market forces are actually failing that SMEs face every single day. I were to summarize what our role is really is to step in and basically address market failures. And we do this. One is bringing best practices. Of course, is financing, or let's say financial tools. I will obviously elaborate on the financials, but I will insist quite a bit on the non-financial side, which I think is absolutely fundamental. When it comes to addressing national or public banks have a obviously a different mandate than policies. So they are able to push the envelope beyond what normal banks do. So we typically provide standard financial instruments that otherwise they wouldn't be there. But that's not where we stop. We also provide technical assistance. This is the non-financial side. Money needs to be accompanied by other forms of support. Without that complementary action, quite often the money that is on lent, that is distributed to final beneficiaries, not reach level of output that it should. And I will give you an example of what we've done in that respect. The third area is that, and we should remember this, public money cannot solve all the problems. If you actually add up all the financing needs in emerging countries, you find out that it goes far beyond the capacity of public institutions. So what do public banks do? Public banks actually find ways to catalyze the private sector into finance. This is something that is called blending. There are different ways of naming this type of activity, but it's fundamental. Private sector, Mr. Batori just mentioned the fact that, highlighted the fact that this fund to support the coffee value chain is both private and public. There is no way that public resources are going to be enough for any initiative in emerging markets. So blending means that we are actually creating financial instruments that are innovation is key, both in technology, but also in finance. So let me give you an example of some of the things we do, therefore, on these two fronts. On the financial innovation, we push banks, engage with banks locally to reach out to clients that are not banked, that are high risk. How we do that? By actually providing guarantees, by actually accompanying them some of the risk off their books. We also, and this is very important, give grants to support the SMEs and bring up their knowledge base, because the more informed they are, the less risky they become. So quite often, I wouldn't say that the ratio is, let's say, 100 to 1, but basically, there is a ratio that you often see: financing and technical assistance. And if you miss that ratio, quite often you have some surprises. But now let me go back to a pure project where actually financing in the first phase is not involved. And this also includes digitalization. Yeah, Fred, one of the things that struck me when I lived was the fact that there are so many younger entrepreneurs that have brilliant ideas. I mean, they have an entrepreneurial spirit that if we had half of it, I think, across the world will be enough. The problem is that quite often that does not reach, that business idea is not transformed into a real concrete corporate type activity. So we set up a platform, a digital platform, that is now reaching thousands and thousands of potentially high growth companies. And they're actually learning how to raise financing. Eventually, this is going to spread across Africa. The marginal cost of adding one firm is zero. It's a platform that actually teaches everyone. So once those firms are selected, we actually will finance them. And insurance, of course, is something that is missing from the equation. We need to add that, but that is something perhaps we could talk about.
Thank you very much, Paolo. And certainly the issue just within the coffee value chain of how few coffee farmers are actually insured, on top of which the whole of the coffee structure is built, is of concern. Of course, we met recently in Rome to discuss that. We just have a slight change of order here, Annie, if you don't mind, because we have His Excellency, Mr. Roger Barrow, Minister of Environment, Water and Sanitation, who was due to make some opening remarks, and we'd like to just slide them in here, and then we can And then we can go to you. Thank you so much. Excellency, please, and give you the floor.
Sorry for my delay. I was at a meeting on plastic waste pollution. We are working to have a new treaty in Busan, in Korea. So we had a ministerial meeting to have a common point of view to what we want in 2 months for our world. So in Burkina Faso, for climate, we have a lot of challenge, but we try to mitigate at different level. First, at the government level, we put in place a bank, agricultural bank, can give finance to producer with some facility, because that is very important. If you produce agriculture and we go to traditional bank to get money, it's very, very difficult. So we put in place agricultural bank, but it's not enough. We need to have some champions. In our country, we have one champions. We called the man we stop desert. Work to have a forest in a dry part of our country. So that is an example. We show the way that we can mitigate climate change. And for that, it takes in the land, make some small wall, keep water during the season, and after the rain, this water keep on the wall can continue to give opportunity to the plant to grow, and it make it and have a lot of around 30 hectares of forest, private forest. Because in our country, to mitigate in the chain value, the tree is not all for landscape, because it is for production. We call what we means, I will give it in French, produit forestier non lieu. If you have forest, we can have some fruit, transform the value chain, and it's transformed. We can take a product for oil, karité. I don't know what is karité. Yes, karité. In my village, we collect karité, and it's collect to go in France. And the one woman is dealing this opportunity, and per year she can collect 1,000 tons of karité to France. That is a big opportunity on valuation, because to collect, she needs to have some woman who is volunteer to collect, and the collection and all the process have certificate by EcoCert, because we don't need to have chemical in the product, and to be sure that the woman who collects it is green job. They have safety. So that is what we can do on a village level. Also, we try to launch what we call a war to green our country. That is very important, because in the past we spend our time to plant trees in the forest. That is good, but population don't see what we are doing. So we decide to green all the country. So we will promote plant trees in the town to have green part in our town. And we start this now, and we hope in 5 years we can reach our goal. So I will come back after deeply in some other issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency, and particularly grounding it in the reality of what farmers and at the bottom of the value chain are actually dealing with, and how they're managing this and how you're supporting them also with the big vision as well in Burkina Faso. Thank you so much for that. If I could go to you now, Annie. I think we've heard quite clearly about how important SMEs are to many things, the value chains that we depend upon, being part of it, and the many risks in which they are facing, whether it's climate, environment degradation, price rises on inputs, conflicts and insecurity, et cetera, et cetera. There's a whole raft of them. From your perspective, how are your members looking at this in their future, and how are they trying to tackle those issues? And perhaps where also financial resilience fits in that. There's a few questions within there, if you could.
SMEs have a crucial role. However, they don't have great power, and often they don't have a voice. And that's why in my private practice, I try to give them a voice. And in my non-for-profit activity with WUSME, we're trying to give a voice. Chia Silva has brilliantly highlighted the fact that the Green Deal has not considered the enterprises. Why? Because the small and medium enterprises don't have the DNA that allows them to kind of great discussions unless they do through or governmental organizations. SMEs are a crucial factor in the economic ecosystem. However, they taken singly, they are not powerful. They are 90% of the worldwide economy. They provide over about 70% of the jobs. But let's not forget that 65% of the SMEs have started with $10,000 or less. Obviously, it has been said in a prior event organized by WUSME that sometimes SMEs find themselves in the situation to have to decide whether to arrive to the end, to focus on the end of the month or the end of the world. And this is understandably, sometimes we all know in our lives, I think, that sometimes urgencies appear to be priorities more than what really substantial priorities are. In SMEs, the real crucial, I understand that Minister Bartoli and Paolo Lombardo, Cassa Depositi and Prestiti, have highlighted like funding is not sufficient per se, because its initiatives are important, and SMEs often lack skills. However, lacking skills is also a product of lacking funds, because obviously if SMEs had more access to governmental or private support, they would be able to hire skilled vice president of development, like larger companies who are good operators in the sustainability have and are focusing on. Now, for me, working in the private sector, I see that there have been some virtual circles that have been created by companies like Generali is created because Lucia Silva. There have been some situations where large companies have realized how SMEs are both their customers and their suppliers. And as such, they have to protect SMEs for a number of reasons. Number one, because they wouldn't have customers if SMEs. Number two, because if SMEs are not able to comply with sustainability measures in their business plan, the entire chain of production, and hence also the large companies, are not going to be in compliance. So there have been situations, for example, in the COP28, companies have been highlighted, ENGIE, which is a
a French energy company, and Veolia, which is a waste management companies. And companies like that, like Generali has done in different ways, have created funds to support the resilience. Like Marcos Netos has said, the resilience is essential especially with the energy crisis in Europe. SMEs are definitely the economic agents that have suffered the most. So having funding to, exactly like renewable energies have intermittency, also SMEs suffer for intermittencies. Hence, the help by government, but also by large companies, can help them ensure also in moments of crisis. And this is extremely and the second way to do it is access to network and access to skills. And in the moment in which an SME is both a supplier and a customer of a large companies, it becomes very helpful if the large company can offer SMEs access to their network and their skills, because people like Lucia Silva could offer expertise to large companies who don't have a chief sustainability officer. And this is very important to identify the little and big ways in which small companies can identify interventions that can introduce in their business measures to support sustainability. And this would create not only a virtuous circle between SMEs and large companies, but also within SMEs business plans themselves. Because I have prepared a little presentation that is available on, but I have highlighted all the virtuous circle effects that SME are going to have once they enhance sustainability measures, because they are going to have access to lending, they're going to have access to consumer revenues are going to be increased by this sell to consumers who are becoming more and more conscious about the sustainability reputation. They are also going to have a higher level of retention of employees. They are going to have capacity to have access to a network that they normally don't have without the help of government or larger companies. So I don't know what is my time. I might have gone out of, beyond.
I think you're close to the limit, if I may.
One last remark I'm going to say, in my being a lawyer, many people, when we talk about sustainability, come to me and say, oh, in the legal world, you haven't seen any problem with sustainability. And I wanted to give just two brief examples. Like one example is we have spoken about coffee. We have represented for many years a large Nicaraguan coffee company, and we had periodically the problem that our company, which was in that case a large company, had to help little coffee farmers, because if little coffee farmers didn't comply, like the minister have said, with the sustainability requirement, then the large company couldn't. Hence, they would lose the financing by, in this case, was a multinational Dutch company. And another field which is absolutely underestimated, in which I have encountered problem for my clients, and I'm actually toiling with that in this specific moment. It would be fun if my client is listening to this. I see that medium and small enterprises are presented more and more with suppliers' rule of conduct and required to adhere to policies. So the client calls me and says, I have this document, it's a 72-page agreement, and the agreement refers to policies, regulations, and any kind of documents which is external to the already long 72-page agreement. To which I have to tell the client, I can be as generous as possible, but there is a cost in reviewing that. And the client usually reacts by saying, oh, you can just look broad strokes and highlight the main point. But unfortunately, as a lawyer, I cannot do that. Either I do a job well or I don't do it at all. And here, the problem of the client, many times we go back to the beginning of the presentation. They have to decide whether to ensure the end of the month or the end of the world. So if they have to sell a product for $5,000. But to set that program, they have to review a document and make sure, because my client is serious, so he wants to make sure he complies with what he signs. The cost of that is going to cost $20,000. And that is, regulations are a scary word for everybody, also big companies. However, for SME, they become a real nightmare and a question of existence.
Thank you very much. I mean, there's a lot there, and I couldn't even dare to summarize, but maybe I'm just going to pick out a few things. One is there certain externalities to the business of SMEs, such as regulation, which can be imposed upon them, which also is a kind of risk or a kind of vulnerability. I think the other one as well, that financial resilience and resilience more broadly is not just about insurance and the sort of technical act of taking away risk and uncertainty, but actually through all these other ways that SMEs can benefit from society and growth and so forth. So, but many more things. Thank you so much there. I think what we're going to do now is we're going to go to the floor and see if there's any questions and comments here. But I know that we have an intervention, first of all, from His Excellency Mr. Osman Saleh Mohammed, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Eritrea. Sir, you have the floor, please.
Good afternoon. Anyway, I could have cited so many examples. I'm not prepared in that way. I have some. I'd like to thank the government of Italy, UNDP, and the private sector organizing this important event and take this opportunity to share some brief remarks. When we talk about the climate crisis, we need to stress that Africa accounts for the smallest share of global greenhouse gas emissions. Yet the consequences are felt the most on the continent. Imperative that the climate change requires global solutions and local actions. Eritrea, within its means and resources, has been mobilizing grassroots community, women, students, the army, civil society organizations, leaders to actively work on environmental restoration, such as soil and water conservation, afforestation, smart agriculture, proper utilization of natural resources. Due to Eritrea's disproportionate to the effects of climate change, national centers on adaptation and resilience. Government acknowledges the important role the private sector could play, in particular small, medium enterprises, have access and support in fulfilling their objectives. For this reason, Eritrea has developed various macro and micro policies, guidelines, have an important contribution to the adaptation and climate change. Our adaptation actions are mainly focused on the agricultural sector, as it is one of our most vulnerable areas to climate change. 70% of the population lives in rural areas and depends on agriculture for its livelihood. Examples of adaptation actions include introducing new farming technologies, both indigenous and modern technology. It is in this regard Eritrea has introduced climate. To conclude, we stress the importance of making small, medium enterprise more resilient and independent. Once again, I would like to thank Italy and UNDP for organizing this event amidst our busy schedules. A reminder for all of us to work together in addressing the climate crisis, not tomorrow, but today. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency, for those words in terms of climate change effects on your country and how you're looking at this from the role of the agricultural sector and SMEs. I think we have the opportunity now, Excellency, to have a few questions from the floor or comments. So just going to see if I have Mr. Marcus Net or of UNDP.
I think Annie had a really important point about the more and more, you know, if you look around climate change, if you look around disclosure issues, we actually spent the last 2 years at the G20 Sustainable Finance Working Group, which was established by the Italian presidency in 2021. We as UNDP provide the Secretariat for the last 2 years under the Indian and the Brazilian presidents discussing how do you address the SME issues when it comes down to issues of disclosure, because big companies like you or big banks are all making either voluntary or more and more regulated commitments in terms of net zero, in terms of a series of those issues. And you've got a series of global standards coming to market, you know, the International Sustainability Standards Board on climate, and now it's going into nature, the Task Force for Nature Financial Disclosure, and so on and so forth. The more the companies or the banks adopt those standards, the more they're going to demand, as the Scope 3 kicks in, for the value chain provide the data. Well, you know, that data SMEs don't have, and they don't have the money to create a system to collect that data. So so how do you then, you know, don't unintentionally, to address a climate problem, create an economic problem to 90% of the world's job creators, right? So one of the things we are doing here is working with Banca d'Italia, which has a fantastic program, you know, to use public available data as proxy data that can be accepted by standards setters as SME data. Singapore is doing the same. There's a project that we're doing now, UNDP, Singaporean government, Brazil, and Banca d'Italia called Project Savannah, which is an attempt to create using cell phone data, cell phone payment, whatever is publicly available to give to the SMEs the data that they need and convince the standards bearer accept that as proxy. Otherwise, you're going to cut a lot of people out of the market. And further you go into the African continent and further you go into other countries of other parts of the world, this gets even a bigger problem. But this is a problem in Italy with your SMEs, as well as in Africa, as well as in Brazil. It is not a problem of developing countries, no. It's a problem of SMEs as a whole. And insurance becomes important because we can even create innovative insurance mechanisms that ensure if the data is wrong, can you be insured? I know you're the insurance expert and others here, but we're really going to have to be creative now to look at those things.
Thank you, Marcus. I mean, maybe just reflecting on that before I hand to Minister Batori on what you can insure or not. You can actually insure anything if you can value it. I mean, and I'm sure Celia would say that. I mean, if there's a market for it, but if you understand that there's something you can value and you can understand the frequency and severity of the thing which threatens the thing you value, then you have insurance. That's why it's sector agnostic, shall we say. But, Minister, I think you want to reflect on what
just to follow on what Marcus was saying concerning regulation. Of course, you know, in order to achieve sustainability across the value chains, you really need to enforce regulations. And the one most important and famous or notorious, better saying, is the EUDR, no? The EU regulation on deforestation, which particularly impacted all value chains, particularly for those small all the farmers that, of course, do not have the capacity to comply, or do not have yet the capacity to comply. I think there are two key words, and we're going through this also while devising the big project, the flagship project of the Mattei Plan on coffee. One is capacity building. I mean, it's absolutely essential. It has to be supported with, of course, grant components and be able to reach out to the smallest, let's say, components of the value chains, with a strong involvement of local associations, coffee associations, for example, in the case of coffee, of the different countries. The second one is technology. I think at the beginning of this very tiring week, we went to Google to an event organized together by the Italian government and UNIDO, where Google, in fact, initiated a partnership with UNIDO and the Italian Development Cooperation to support coffee producers with the use of technology in order to be compliant with the EUDR. Of course, Italy being a member of the European Union and supporting the EUDR such, because it is part of our strategy, is very much cognizant of the fact that not all the company, particularly the small and medium-sized companies, will be able to strictly comply with the deadline of the enforcement of this regulation. So it is our duty and responsibility to be able to provide that capacity, including with the use of technology, in order to equip the smallholder farmers and the SMEs to be able to comply.
Thank you, Minister Bartori. Noting on the other aspects of resilience also being helping small businesses to actually manage the regulatory burden, if you like, or the hurdle which they have to do in order to continue to be in the market. I think we all have a contribution from our friends at the UN Global Compact.
Yeah, thank you.
Please.
Starting from what Minister Bartori was saying, the regulation, we all are very aware that the CSRD, the new European directive, as well as a CDD, it's not in European law regulation only, because supply chains are not only in Europe. So many companies in Europe have their supply chains in developing country. And my point is, bigger companies have a huge responsibility on this regulation, and also have a huge power of influencing on their supply chain. So capacity building is something they can really do, but not only capacity building on reporting and on sustainable issues, because we have like 3 trillion financing gap to reach the goals each year by 2030 of the agenda. So there is a lot to do in sustainability, a lot to do in reporting. And I think big companies can be a player side by side with governments, and also have a responsibility to, I'm very glad here to have CDP and SNAM, which are all members of Global Compact in Italy, to, as of course, Generali, to invest their corporate finance. So we launched this platform on corporate finance, and our main objective is to engage companies to invest at least 50% of their corporate finance in sustainable development. And in this investment, of course, there is the involvement of their supply chains. So we do think that the private sector can be a real ally in this issue of SME. And also, we are very well aware that in many countries, and Italy is one of these, small, medium enterprise are the majority of companies we have. In our Global Compact, we have 60% of small, medium enterprise and 40% of business, big corporations. So we have to leave no one behind and bring SME on board on this. And we think collaboration with, in a multi-stakeholder logic, organization like UN Global Compact, companies and SME can really do a lot on that, and governments as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I mean, noting on the importance of alliances across the business sector, and of course, the inter-reliance between them, large companies depending on small companies, etc. And Italy, my wife being Italian and coming from northern Italy, I know this very well. For example, how, on the one hand, for example, how badly the area was affected, both in the sort of financial crisis of the 2008, 2009 area, and then to an extent also, perhaps a slightly lesser extent, I thought, in the COVID period. But the interreliance of all of the small, relatively family-owned businesses of that area and how connected into the larger infrastructure of Italian manufacturing, et cetera, was very relevant to me from a family perspective. I think we do not have any further speakers, unless I'm going to ask any further comments or speakers.
I'd like to highlight, maybe repeat and repeat and repeat how important it is, like the public and private partnerships. How crucial is your role in really kind of runs in the right way? Because the issue that we have ahead are so big that only if we kind of join forces, we can solve the problem of the coffee supply chains. And all these are risk for big companies. Regulatory risk, because in Europe also banks have to evaluate the greenium of the companies they. So it's really all connected, and public and private partnership is really the key of, say, value and values.
Thank you very much, Lucia. I think we can end it there. Maybe I can just reflect on that one comment with a couple of thoughts before I hand over to Ambassador Massari to finish, is that certainly the public-private partnership of things is absolutely critical, and that's how UNDP is partnering with Generali and also with other actors in the insurance chain. Apart from anything, we're not an insurer. So if we value financial resilience, we see it as important within the SME world and within the value chains, therefore we have to work with you and work with others like you to actually build the financial resilience of these critical parts of everything on which we depend. Maybe just as a note, because I think you kind of inferred, sort of implied, is perhaps how the development system still needs to change its thoughts when it comes to financial resilience. I've been talking a lot in various panels here in New York about how little financing from the development side of things actually goes towards financial resilience and insurance. My back of the envelope calculation is probably that we spend 1,000 times more on development assistance as a whole than we do on protecting that financially from crisis. So if you look at development assistance being about $223 billion, I think it was in 2023, my cautious estimate of how much is being spent on financial resilience, insurance, and so forth is about 200 to 300 million a year. So that perhaps is something for us to reflect on. If our analysis here that we've talked about, how everything is super dependent on smallholder farmers, on SMEs, and very little of that actually has insurance, and yet perhaps development assistance is not necessarily targeting it as much as it should be. And with that, if I may hand over to you, Excellency Ambassador.
Very much, Jan, and thank you all the speakers for this very insightful remarks on how to further support and advance the action on and sustainability of area where we said the public and private partnerships and cooperation very important, and which we are seeing already very good impact, as we saw. Not only challenges have been raised here, but also opportunities to grasp. So I would say that in conclusion, let's continue to this kind of discussion. Let's not make this just one-off meeting. I think this public-private participation is format when system involved can be very useful to repeat discussions in the future. Discussion, of course, and a particular emphasis, of course, on Africa for policy. So let's meet again and in a similar format and touch again. Thank you very much for participating today.